What is good, YouTube? It is one of the hosts of this podcast. This is Jonah Park. I just wanted to preface today that this is Season 1, Episode 1 of our podcast. Unfortunately, for this podcast, there was no video recording. So I just want to preface that for you. If you're watching this and you're like, when am I going to see those lovely, gorgeous faces of theirs? I'm sorry. For this episode and this episode alone, there was no video recording. However, we still want to present the full season to you. So just sit back, relax, just take a listen to Season 1, Episode 1 of the Pop Culture Roundup podcast. Welcome back to Pop Culture Roundup, a podcast where we round up the latest news and talk all things pop culture. I'm your host, Jonah Park. I am taking over for the original 4 members of this podcast. Slowly but surely, each and every one of them got so busy with their own schedules, and I didn't want to let the podcast die because I loved getting to contribute on the creative aspect of everything, such as the logo and the theme song. So I figured, you know what, why not me just take over, and then whenever each member is free, they're more than welcome just to hop on and we can have a discussion. Today we are talking with the great Andrew Kahnke, one of the original 4 members of this podcast. Keep in mind, just want to let you guys know that this podcast was recorded. I'm going through my notes right now just to see when exactly it was recorded. Sorry guys, hang on one second. Where'd you go, buddy? There we go. Yeah, this podcast was originally recorded on January, I believe, 12th of 2022. So obviously, keep in mind, a lot of things have aged. A lot of things have come out in the meantime. The only reason for holding back on releasing episodes was because at the time I was working on my album and I wanted to dedicate most of my time to working on that. Finally finished the album and now kind of in a limbo spot to where I'm not really working on anything creatively. So I figured, you know what, why not pick this up and just do this in the meantime. And so this is a podcast we recorded way back, and you're going to hear some references to some things that have already come out. You'll hear a lot of things that didn't age well in terms of expectations for different projects. But yeah, this is just a fun discussion today. We're not going too in depth with anything major. But first, a message from our very real, not fake whatsoever, not silly, not real, not fake sponsors. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Hey gang, I just want to give a brief shout out to our sponsors. Here's the first one. A lot of people know Shredder as the evil leader of a terrorist organization hell-bent on destroying a group of Renaissance-named kung fu fighting turtles known as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But what people may not know is that Shredder is also the lead guitarist in a heavy metal band called Go to Shell. And now, for a limited time only, Shredder is giving guitar lessons to anyone interested. Anyone can join. Whether you're just starting, you're intermediate, or you have access to rat poison, Shredder can teach you. And we have a special deal for our listeners. By using the code DOWNWITHTHETURTLES, you can save 30% off of your first 3 lessons. So don't hesitate. Start your lessons today. Shredder's Guitar Lessons. Redefining shredding since 1984. And for our active listeners, those who are really wanting to go the extra mile, we also have a sponsor from Vormir Rock Climbing. Vormir Rock Climbing, the only place where you'll hear last one to the Soulstone gets to go home to their families. This has been false advertising. And now, back to our regularly scheduled program. Fandoms. Fandoms are great. And in their infancy, they were small, right? You would look at the modern fandom of any pop culture thing, I would say personally, as like late 70s, maybe early 80s. And from there on, it just grew. And so back in the day, whenever creators were creating their worlds, such as like Star Wars or the Marvel universe or stuff like that, fans would have input for sure, but it was definitely up to the creator to create something good. And they were still building their worlds, and it's grown. It's grown from there. And nowadays we have an expanded fandom of every kind and sort, and of these really well established universes. And so nowadays, with the expanse of like social media and stuff like that, we have fans that are actively building expectations and anticipations for projects. And because of how far reaching the internet is, those expectations are being broadcast to the world and are gaining huge tractions. And so, what creators have done more recently now is they listen to the expectations of the fans, and they will actually meet their expectations exactly how they wanted them, and whatever. They'll meet the expectations of the fans. And sometimes you get directors or creators that will choose to do something differently creatively. They'll take a different path that you weren't expecting, and sometimes it's well received and other times it's not. But the question today really is, which is better? Is it better to pay the fan service? Is it better to meet the fans' expectations? Or is it better to do a creatively different approach? Two very great examples are Avengers Endgame and The Last Jedi. Avengers Endgame was kind of the wrap-up of the Infinity Saga. And we really wanted to see them pay homage to everything that had built it up to that point. So they did the time-traveling storyline, which was kind of cool. And they wanted to see every hero that they had grown up with, you know? And so we've got this massive cast of A-list actors, all on the big screen fighting one of the biggest threats to the Marvel Universe, which is Thanos. And it's great, and it's epic, and it's fantastic. On the other hand, we've got The Last Jedi, which is something that is so contrary to the typical Star Wars universe. Rian Johnson, a beloved and amazing director who's directed movies such as Knives Out, did a fantastic job with Knives Out, chose to do something different. And thankfully, he stuck closely to character design and set design and costume design, and everything looked normal, but you could tell the tone of it was different. Very specifically, character development, and to be even more specific, Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker took a complete shift from where we last saw him in Return of the Jedi. So today, I have with me one of the co-creators of this podcast, one of the original four members, and someone who I genuinely, one of my favorite people to talk about anything pop culture with, and that is my good friend Andrew Kahnke. Andrew, welcome to the show.
What's up, everyone? How's it going?
All right, so yeah, I just want to pick your brain. What do you think? Because I've heard you say before, I think you said Last Jedi was one of your favorite Star Wars movies. Was that correct, or was that
Yes,
not?
that is correct. It ranks among my top five, and my favorite Star Wars movie, or tied with my favorite Star Wars movie, is The Rise of Skywalker, which there's also a lot to talk about there regarding fan service. It's tied with A New Hope, just FYI. But regarding The Last Jedi, I think Rian Johnson did the right move by not... I don't want to say pandering to the fans, but like giving us something different. Because one of the biggest complaints that you always see with The Force Awakens is that it's just A New Hope with a new coat of paint. And I don't entirely disagree with that sentiment. Which is why I think The Last Jedi is such a nice breath of fresh air, because it's something new, it's something different, but it's recognizably Star Wars. It has shades of Empire Strikes Back, your protagonist, in this case Rey, going to a deserted planet to seek out an old, long forgotten Jedi, in this case Luke. But whereas in Empire, Yoda was like, "Yeah, sure, Luke, I'll help you out." In in Last Jedi, Luke's like, "No, I'm not gonna help you. Full send, I'm not gonna help you at all." I think it's just a really interesting dynamic because, I mean, this term gets thrown around a lot, but expectation subversion, you know, at the end of The Force Awakens, we see Rey handing the lightsaber over to Luke, and we're like, okay, he's going to take the lightsaber and he's going to know what to do. He's going to train this new Jedi to stop, the dark side. And then we get to that end, he throws it over his shoulder, and it's like, yo, what? What the heck just happened? And I think for some people that was probably like the turn off point for the movie where they were like, ooh, I don't like that. But for me, I think The Last Jedi Luke is probably the most interesting Luke we've gotten in all of Star Wars.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I like the concept of like a very like jaded trainer, like who's been and served his time. I think it is a little disheartening for the fans to go from immediately like Luke being like, "Nah, fam, we ain't gonna do this," to like alien milk. Like the transition there was like, okay, like I don't know how I feel about that. But how do you feel like this version of Luke like does the transition between where we left him in Return of the Jedi and where we pick up with in The Last Jedi, does the transition as a Star Wars fan make sense to you, and is it something you can get behind?
Um, I think if you're a first time viewer and you're watching these things in the order they release, so you don't have anything from like The Mandalorian or any other external stuff like from the comics or books and stuff, I think, yeah, the turn can be extraordinarily jarring. Even I, the first time seeing it, was like, yo, what? But I think as the movie progresses and you learn what happened, you realize, yeah, this kind of makes sense. And like you see this a lot, but I feel like I feel like people misunderstand why Luke did what he did, because everyone, I see a lot online, oh, Luke went to Ben and oh, he had a bad dream, guess he has to die now. That's not what happened. It's Luke had a moment of doubt, and we've seen this before. If you look, like, I when I say it was jarring, I think just like from seeing him all happy-go-lucky at the end of Return of the Jedi, he's with his friends on Endor, everything's good, the Empire's gone, everything should be good, but then you get to The Last Jedi and he's absolutely jaded. He does not want anything to do with this. That can be jarring, but you have to take a step back and realize that even before the ending of Return of the Jedi, he was still 100% like struggling with the dark side. I mean, on Death Star 2, like the mere mention, like Darth Vader just simply mentioning Leia's name sends him into a blinding rage, which ends up with him repeatedly bashing his lightsaber into Darth Vader's saber, eventually cutting off his hand. And that's when he realized, he was like, oh, oh, we're not that different. Oh, okay, I gotta stop. I gotta stop this. That was his moment of clarity. And I think some people take that as him completely being rid of the dark side entirely. But throughout Star Wars lore, through the prequels and originals and everything, we know that resisting the dark side is not a one-time thing. It's like you're going on a diet and you've spent years and years just like eating whatever, and all of a sudden you're like, you know what, I'm done with that. I need to stop this. But you still see those chips over on the snack table, and you're like, maybe, nah, I can't do that. And in The Last Jedi, as we see in the flashbacks, Luke reached for those chips. He reached for those chips, and he was like, no. But unfortunately, you know, Ben saw what he was doing, and he jumped to a conclusion, and that conclusion led him further down a path that maybe he necessarily wasn't destined for, but due to Luke's actions, that was now set in stone. And I think a lot of people had a problem with that because it's not what they expected of their childhood hero. And I mean, I'm just going to put this bluntly. Luke Skywalker has never been my favorite Star Wars character. So I wasn't like overly attached to this legend status that he had, which, by the way, is a whole reason, Rey is kind of like the audience insert. I mean, she is the audience insert in terms of like focusing on Luke because she has the Luke Skywalker legend in her mind, and then she meets him and he's done. He doesn't care about any of this. I think it's just a really interesting character development, and I think it's a good example of subverting expectations.
Yeah. And I think too, like, as the more you think about it too, like the whole struggle of a son witnessing firsthand his dad being somebody who he had never imagined. Like, all he's ever heard about his dad is, oh, he was a great Jedi Knight, oh, he was this great blah 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 blah, only to find out he's the main antagonist of your story. Like, that's got to be scarring. That's got to lead you to have some sort of trust issues with everyone and everything you come in contact with. No wonder at the first sign of Ben Solo, like, turning evil, or even just the whispers of that happening, would he then, turn and try and attack him. But you're right. It's very much a constant struggle of like, I can't feed into this. I can't do this. So, I don't blame him. And I think you're right. The more that we have conversations like this where we really break down the art itself and really think like, okay, let's look past what we were expecting as fans and really understand like, okay, what was the director's vision with this? I feel like it gains more appreciation as time progresses. And that's to be said for a lot of things. But I now I kind of want to switch it over to movies like Avengers Endgame. Now, I've heard you say as well, like, one of your favorite Marvel movies is Captain America and the Winter Soldier. Very very well deserved movie, And so, I wanna ask, like, in the terms of Marvel movies, where do movies like Avengers Endgame and Spider-Man No Way Home land on that scale? Because a lot of people, Spider-Man No Way Home just came out recently. A lot of people are labeling No Way Home as one of the best Marvel movies out there. I don't disagree, but I want to hear your perspective, seeing as though Winter Soldier is your self-proclaimed best MCU movie. What are your opinions on big fan service movies like Endgame and No Way Home?
Well, first of all, I love Endgame and No Way Home, and honestly, No Way Home might take the top spot from Winter Soldier, but it's real close. But I think there is something to be said about earned fan service, as you were saying in the, intro to this discussion. Endgame was the culmination of 11 years worth of movies. I remember seeing Iron Man 1 back in first grade, 2008. That, oof. And now we're here and watching three different generations of Spider-Man show up on the same screen. We told you there would be spoilers, just FYI. And I think Endgame definitely falls into the category of earned fan service, because I mean, like, take my favorite moment from the movie that isn't the portal scene that happens literally right before it. You have Age of Ultron. They're all sitting around. They're having a blast. They're having a good old after party, and they're like, "Oh, he should hold the hammer, be the mighty Thor," and they're all trying to pick it up, and Cap moves it, and it's like, "Yo, what? Cap moved Mjolnir? What is that?" Oh, whatever. Let the fan theories run wild, and then you get to Endgame, and boom, he catches it. Thor says, "I knew it," and he just goes to town on Thanos. Like, that's a moment of earned fan service because we've grown with this character. We know that his moral compass is on point. If there is one person in the MCU to get behind 100% on all decisions, it's Captain America because you know he's probably going to be right. And I know you were Team Iron Man, but come on, Team Cap all the way. Like you were in the wrong on that one, Jonah. I'm sorry. And there are like tiny things like so in Civil War, you know, Ant-Man gets knocked down, or should I say Giant Man gets knocked down, and he asks, does anyone have any orange slices? Cut to Endgame. Clint Barton goes into the past and, you know, figures out, yeah, this works. We can bring stuff back from the past into the future. Or more accurately, we can bring stuff from a different dimension into ours. And he's standing there with a bag of orange slices, and you get stuff like Black Widow has her ballet shoes out, and you know, just honestly, that whole portal scene is just like a 3 minute long. Just here's all your fan service. Here's it all. Here you go. This is everything you've ever wanted. And you know that's a thing of earned fan service. However, I think at a certain point it does get in the way of story, because I think from a story perspective, Infinity War is much more well told and a lot more concise, and I don't want to say more impactful, but it's kind of hard to put into words, I guess. It's just it hits different. And I think it's because on that one they weren't so much focused on fan service. It's just build up Thanos, make him a credible threat, you know, make him a little bit sympathetic, and then kill half of everyone. You know, the movie did what it set out to do, and you know, it has its fan service moments in it, but Endgame was the real fan service movie, and I don't think there's any negatives to it from a diehard fan. Now I can see, you know, casual fans being like, you know, oh, I guess one that's kind of picked apart is did all the, you know, women superhero, did they all need to be standing together? You know, maybe not, but you know, it's cool. Like it's, you know, yeah, it didn't need to happen, but like it did. That's a thing in the comics, you know, that's happened.
But you made a really great point in what you just said. So you said Avengers Endgame was great because of the fan service, but Infinity War did a better job at telling a concise story. So do you feel like movies that are trying to play the fan service up, like do you feel like the movies that are trying to pay that fan service to the fans, do you feel like they relied too much on that as a safety net so that they don't have to build a compelling story? Or do you feel like, for the most part, they do a really good job at telling a pretty compelling story and still having that fan service in there? I noticed this. The movies with the most fan service are kind of the end to a trilogy or a saga. You got your Avengers Endgame. No Way Home was kind of the end to a trilogy, and you got Rise of Skywalker. People had issues with Rise of Skywalker, though I feel like it was way better received than The Last Jedi. People still had issues with the lack of a compelling story. So what's your take on that?
So I do agree that I think the Rise of Skywalker was definitely more well received, though not as well received as The Force Awakens, which, as in comparison to the trilogy, kind of goes under the radar, mostly because it plays it really safe. But I think the Rise of Skywalker did a good job of giving us new stuff without and all, you know, balancing new stuff with fan service, because like Like, okay, so for example, one of the biggest complaints is that Palpatine's return isn't fully explained, and I cannot disagree with that more, because when Kylo Ren is walking through his temple on Exegol, we see cloning chambers, and then we get the ever so memed line said right back to us. Palpatine just straight up says, the dark side is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. So, right off the bat, we know that what Palpatine did to survive is not normal. He cloned, he transferred his spirit, he did all of this. And a lot of people, I feel, like just missed that or are willfully not paying attention to that. And I'm not here to knock people that don't like the movie. It has its problems. I think it moves at a breakneck pace. Like when I first watched it, I was like, "Holy crap, we are moving from location to location so fast." But like I think it does fan service really well. I think it does it better than The Force Awakens. Because in The Force Awakens, you get moments where, like, oh, Finn just holds up the little training droid that Luke uses and he throws it away. Or you get moments where it's like, the fan service is there, but it doesn't, it's sort of like how in every single James Bond movie, you always expect him to say at some point both martini, shaken, not stirred, or vodka martini, shaken, not stirred, and also my name's Bond, James Bond. They're those built-in tropes, and specifically, you get ones like, I have a really bad feeling about this. They're always there, and no one really complains about them because they're expected. But I think sometimes fan service is expected to the detriment. Which is why The Force Awakens coming out and giving us a lot of fan service feels a little bit empty to me, especially when it's like, hey, remember this thing? I mean, South Park did a whole thing on it. But then you get to The Rise of Skywalker and you get, Chewbacca finally getting his medal that he should have gotten back in A New Hope. Like, I think, yeah, I guess it's sort of on the same level of, oh, look, do you remember this thing? But, it just has a different feel to it to me. Like Chewie earned this, and now he's finally getting it after he's earned it several times over. But then Finn picking up the training droid, it's like, he held the thing, guys. You see that? And I don't have a problem with the training droid thing. I think that's great, but I think there are different levels of fan service. There's the level of which it makes sense, and then there's a level of it's just there. And I think The Force Awakens does it to be it's just there, and The Force Awakens does it to make sense. And the thing I really like about Endgame and The Rise of Skywalker and Return of the King is my favorite bit of fan service, or maybe a cliche if you want to, but the last minute rescue. Return of the King. You're at the walls of Minas Tirith. Hope is lost. It's done. Gondor is gonna fall. But then you hear a horn, and you just see 5,000 horses show up, and you're like, wow, okay, the day is saved, and you get this epic score and this epic charge, which I still sometimes look up on YouTube and just watch on its own. Or, sometimes I'll just watch the entire 4.5 hour long movie. It is what it is. And then, same thing happens in Endgame. Iron Man and Thor are down, everyone else is scattered amongst the ruins of the Avengers compound. Cap has just taken a beating, and once again, he can do this all day. He gets up and single-handedly faces down Thanos' army, and then you hear some iconic lines, which, again, another bit of fan service. Sam says, on your left, and then just literally one of the best sequences in all of movie history. And I mean that. And then you get the exact same thing in The Rise of Skywalker. And some people complain about this because of how closely the movie's released and accused Star Wars of copying. But those people don't know how movies are made because they were made at the same time. There's no copying there. If anything, both of them are copying Return of the King, and even Return of the King is copying, similar things. But in The Rise of Skywalker, hope is lost. Everyone is dying. Poe, in his first real mission as a commander, has pretty much led his entire team on a death run, and it's over for them. And then you hear Lando on the radio, and he succeeded in his mission. You see thousands of ships show up, and just John Williams goes freaking ham on that score. That dude is playing the heck out of that Star Wars theme. And it just feels earned to me. And then you get a similar thing, which I think is the most bit of earned fan service in all of Star Wars, and before No Way Home would have been all of Marvel as well. But it's when, Rey is on the ground. It looks like it's over. Palpatine is just, using his lightning on all the ships, just going boss mode on everything. And then you start to hear all the Jedi from the past. I think that is one of the best moments of fan service because it pays off. Having watched everything before, including the TV shows, hearing Ahsoka and Kanan, who is my favorite Star Wars character, hearing them, hearing all the Jedi, Luke, Mace Windu, Qui-Gon Jinn, I was about to say Liam Neeson, both Ewan McGregor and Alec Guinness, hearing all of them and Hayden Christensen, almost forgot about him. That just felt amazing, and I think it's what, helps separate between earned fan service and it's just there fan service.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, I think as a creator, in these pre-existing worlds that have been created long before we've ever existed, I do think fan service is needed. I don't think you can just say screw you to all the fans and just do your own thing all the time. But I wish fandoms were more accepting to a different vision. And you hear this all the time with especially in the comics, like the comic book realm, specifically with the MCU. You look at Civil War, a pre-existing comic book that has long since been a very, even people who hadn't read it knew about Civil War and what went down and all of that. And then you watch the movie and it has its creative differences, whether that be because you can't get the Fantastic Four and Wolverine and the X-Men characters in there, or whether it's, because of something else. But you look at that and you hear the comic book fans being like, why would you do this? Why would you make... And honestly, I personally would much rather be listening to a story that I don't know the exact next move, because it makes it more compelling. But I also don't want you to ignore the source material, and I think they did a really good job at acknowledging the source material where they could, especially that iconic shot where Cap's holding the shield up and Iron Man's doing the blast and stuff like that. So
One
I think
of the
it's
best shots in the MCU.
100%, and the just the way the camera's moving with just such a great scene. But that brings up some good kind of exceptions, I would say. in these two dueling realities. For example, an example of someone who took a creatively different approach to an existing universe, and it actually turned out very well, is Zack Snyder and the Snyderverse. The Snyderverse does not. It follows the comics, I would personally say, very loosely. Namely, Batman and his code of morale is not really developed, and it does get developed over time, but for sure it's not there yet. And one that took like a very different approach to the DC Comics era, and yet you get rumors of the Flash and the Flashpoint series kind of erasing everything that Snyder had built, and you have fans rioting and petitioning that Snyder worked so hard for this universe, and I think it's well deserved. I think he did his due diligence, and especially with the Justice League and his cut of the Justice League, absolutely well deserved. But you have exceptions like that, and you also have exceptions like, I guess not an exception per se, but you have instances like the Sonic the Hedgehog movie where, you release that first trailer and the character design is, oh my gosh, why would you do that? I know you're trying to do a creative thing and make it different than the game, but maybe you should stick closer to that. And they listened. That's insane. Like, that's what I'm saying. Fandoms have become this huge entity now where people get upset and executives listen and they choose to make changes to their movie because of it. I personally want to get your take on the Snyderverse. I've heard you say before, you're a fan of it, and that's great. But what do you think in the context of this being a creative difference and a different path to take compared to the source material, and yet it doing so successful? Like, do you think in this specific case that Zack Snyder should have stuck closer to the source material? Because we can all agree the DCEU is kind of in shambles at the moment. And I don't think it's necessarily Zack Snyder's fault, but I think because of, the war between Warner Brothers and Zack Snyder, it's kind of been like a messy divorce almost. And I think the DCEU is suffering terribly because of it. Do you think that Zack Snyder should have stuck with that source material, or do you think that he's done a great job and actually he should keep going with this creatively different path?
I think I would love to see more of the Snyderverse. I think it's mostly because DC has sort of just been stuck doing Batman and Superman over and over again. And I mean, obviously, we still got Batman and Superman, but like, it was different. I like Man of Steel is my favorite Superman movie, because it just feels real. I think that's one thing that Zack Snyder does really good is, building up those power levels. Because no shade to the original Superman movies, but in those movies, aside from catching a few helicopters here and there, or like, an elevator or whatnot, it just never, Superman just never felt really strong. He never felt like God tier strong in those movies like he's supposed to be. And even in Superman Returns with Brandon Routh, I still didn't get that sense, even though he's lifting huge things. He's stopping airplanes. He's lifting a huge chunk of landmass made of kryptonite. I was about to say carbonite, made of kryptonite, just into space, and yet Man of Steel is the one that I feel captures his strength the best, because that fight with Zod feels so visceral. Like, you feel every single punch, and even in the fight in his hometown, I'm blanking on the name.
Smallville.
That feels. I did want to say Smallville.
Yeah.
It just didn't sound right. But like, that fight is real. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Zack Snyder does action really well. And yeah, I think you know, I think Batman not having his no kill rule was a bit of an adjustment, even for me. Um, but like you get clues that maybe he wasn't always this way because you see you see Robin's old suit and it's the implication is that Robin is dead or and basically yeah Robin is dead and Batman has not been the same and like even Alfred comments on this throughout the movie. He's like, dude, maybe you're taking things a step too far. Like, why are we branding people? Um, and Batman is having none of it. He's like, these are criminals. They need to be stopped. Maybe I don't kill all of them, but what I'm going to do is make sure that they get their just deserves. And, you know, that's maybe a difficult concept to deal with when you're used to a Batman who is so sternly anti-killing that it can be difficult. But I think as much as it was hard to swallow, I also think it was a bit of a breath of fresh air because it's a Superman or it's a Batman we don't see because we always see Batman in year one or year two. You get the Tim Burton ones, and which by the way, Tim Burton Batman kills a ton of people. By the way, like a ton of people, but that's not what he's like remembered for, because he mostly doesn't kill people. And then you fast forward to everyone's favorite George Clooney or Val Kilmer Batman, who they don't kill. They're comic. They're zany and wacky. And oh look, he's got the Bat credit card. Um, and then you get to Nolan's Batman, who you know is grounded but still has that moral code and his moral code is earned because we see him training with the League of Shadows and we understand that he doesn't want to kill. He won't kill because he's no better than the criminals that he's trying to stop. And then we get to the Snyderverse Batman, and we get the sense that he may have been like that at one point, but he just stopped pulling his punches at a certain point and just went for it. Maybe not all the time, but like because obviously, like we see in the suicide or not the suicide, we see in Suicide Squad that Harley Quinn is drowning and he jumps in to save her. So he's not a murdering machine. He's not going to kill everyone, but like, you know, sometimes he isn't going to, pull his punch. And I think it's an interesting concept to deal. It kind of harkens back to Luke, a broken and jaded man who has lost his way, in a sense. And I think that's one of the more interesting character arcs a character can take, especially one that's really beloved. Now, whether or not the Snyderverse should remain, I would love it to remain because what his Justice League setup is very interesting. I would love, love, love to see a live action adaptation of the Injustice universe. I think that is very interesting and the epitome of breaking down a beloved character into someone unrecognizable. And even in this situation, Superman doesn't necessarily need to be redeemed, but if the leaks and rumors are true about the Flash movie, I guess we'll never know. And part of me is disappointed, but also part of me hopes that DC can kind of get their act together. Because they've been hitting it out of the park. Like, this is controversial, but I actually really enjoyed Wonder Woman 84. Barring a few issues, I think it's a little weird that Steve Trevor couldn't just come back. He had to be put in someone else's body, but they could just make nukes appear out of thin air. There were a few weird decisions in there and a few things that didn't need to happen, but overall I found it an enjoyable movie. But then, Aquaman, Shazam, The Suicide Squad, those are all great movies. I think we can all agree that at the bare minimum they are fun and enjoyable. So I think DC knows how to make good movies. It's just that they tried too hard to compete with Marvel, and I think they don't really realize that there's no competing with Marvel anymore. If they had started back in 2008 and built out Nolan's Batman and doing all that stuff, yeah, you could probably have a nice little rivalry there, but that's not what happened. It uh, it just never came to be. And now there's no competing with Marvel. And that's not a bad thing. It just means that instead of trying to compete, they just need to make good movies, which I think they're trying to do right now.
I would agree. I think what was so great about Zack Snyder's universe was that it was refreshing. It because when you talk about comic book movies, you half expect them to copy each other as far as format of movies and universes go, and Zack Snyder was blatantly not trying to copy the MCU, and I think that's so refreshing to see. It felt a little rushed. I'm not gonna lie. Going from Superman to Batman v Superman, where in that one movie we're introduced to every Justice League character. Okay, in some capacity. Okay, that's a little rushed. I would have hoped that they would have kind of built that out a little bit more. A little bit rushed, and then from there we go immediately into I guess not immediately. There were Wonder Woman and different solo movies in between for sure. But then we go basically straight into Justice League, and I had wished it would have been the Snyder cut of Justice League, but no, we got Joss Whedon's Justice League for sure, and that is, I think that actually is a rare case of Joss Whedon's Justice League was a very weird situation because it was twofold. It was him making creative decisions that were different than you would typically expect out of the characters, but it was also him trying to pay fan service, which I think to him meant trying to copy what he did in the Avengers and do it in the Justice League. And it's the amalgamation of both didn't work whatsoever. You got Batman throwing out quips. It's no, excuse me. Yeah. But then you get all these movies and great movies. If they are building a universe with these movies, I have yet to see where, with the MCU, it was pretty concise how they were building it, and even though you didn't necessarily see what it was leading to, you still understood, okay, they're trying to connect them somehow, some way, and that makes sense, But you have in the Suicide Squad, great example, Bloodspot is in prison for shooting Superman, and instead of being oh dang, he shot Superman, you're left asking yourself, which Superman? Which is not a question you want to be asking when you're trying to build a universe, because people don't know if Henry Cavill is going to return or not. So it's a little bit of a mess, but I'm here for it and I'm appreciating the movies. I don't think the movies yet have been something that I would be yeah, that was a good movie so far. I don't think they're terrible. You look at your Aquamans, your Wonder Womans have been great. I would agree. Wonder Woman 84, fantastic movie. You're right that it does have its troubles, but for sure a good movie. And you've got Shazam, which is a good comedy, family feel good movie. I have some complaints there. You got Aquaman, it's got some really, really awesome underwater fight sequences, and even somewhat of a cool plot. You know, that final battle scene with the Kraken and whatever was super cool, getting a comic accurate suit. Really cool. Again, have some problems with it, and that's okay. I'm just hoping for more of a concise universe, but that's a completely different topic. So I think we're kind of nearing somewhat of the end of our discussion, and I guess my question is to you, and maybe you can't answer this, but just to ask it, what, in your opinion, is a better way to what is a better way to approach it? Is it to appeal to the fan service? Is it is it to go in your own direction as a creator and a director, or is it an amalgamation of both? Like what? And if so, what is that perfect mixture of both worlds?
So, I think this year, or last year, I guess 2021, gave us some really good examples of subverting fan expectations and also giving into them. Giving into them in quotation marks. I think, and this is all MCU related, so we'll just start from the top. Black Widow, your pretty typical Marvel movie, but a lot of people were not cool with the changes they made to Taskmaster. And I understand those. Taskmaster in the movie versus Taskmaster in the comics is very different, almost polar opposites. I, for one, don't mind the change they made, mostly because what I saw in the marketing is what I got in the movie, but also there's nothing stopping Taskmaster right now from being more like her comic book counterpart now. Because all the trailers gave me some real Terminator vibes. A silent badass, for lack of a better term. And that's what I got. So I was fine. I will say the reveal felt a little lackluster. Like there was a lot of build up to it in that scene, and then it's just kind of no one. Like it's someone we know they've been set up numerous times throughout the movie, but it just didn't feel like a good enough reveal. And I think maybe that's not a good case of subverting expectations. I wouldn't say it was done poorly, but I think it was not necessary to do that. But then
I will.
Go ahead.
I will say though, in terms of the story itself, I feel like it played very well, because I came to this conclusion actually listening to your guys' review of Black Widow. You're right. In the first Avengers, there's a very throwaway line by Loki of like Dracov's daughter, but that just goes how far back the trail of guilt has followed her, you know, and it, in a way, that reveal of who Taskmaster is kind of a very like it almost gives closure to the Black Widow character as far as her goal of getting rid of all the red in her ledger. And again, I was walking away from the theaters like, oh, and then I was like, oh, like that's Taskmaster, and the question of like, okay, so is Taskmaster going to appear in the future movies now, or is that like the end? Because that's such a beloved comic book character. But I will say, although I wish they didn't put Taskmaster in that role of like character closure for Black Widow, I'm at least glad that there was that closure for that character in that way in her own solo movie, which would be her last appearance in that. I personally enjoy that, and actually, when I viewed it through that, I was like, oh, okay, that actually makes a lot more sense, and I'm not as disappointed. Anyways, sorry, completely cut you off. You were talking about Black Widow, and you're right. It did feel very like at first, and it took me a while to like get around to like okay. But anyways, yeah, you were saying.
I agree completely with what you said, but I think I better example and a more necessary version of subverting expectations comes in the form of just Eternals as a whole, the entire movie. It's very different. A lot of people, mostly critics, just kind of weren't on board with it. It wasn't your standard Marvel movie. It's very different. I mean, even I was like, I was surprised by a few things, mostly the fact that it opens up with like a text crawl like Star Wars. I was like, whoa, what is this? What, we're doing this now? But I think it helps. I I think also I think it was difficult for some people to get on like the Eternals as characters because they aren't heroes. They're just people doing their jobs. And at the end, they do end up being heroes, but it isn't like it isn't something like Iron Man or Captain America who are doing it because they're heroes. The Eternals did what they did in that movie not because they were trying to be heroes, but because they were they were led astray. Basically, they were lied to, and they realized that they didn't want to deal with that anymore. And I think that turned a lot of people off. Me personally, I really like the Eternals. I don't think it ranks anywhere in my top 5 MCU movies, but it ranks pretty high up there. But there are some notable differences from um, what we see in your typical MCU. There are jokes. There are some absolutely hilarious jokes in there, but it isn't like a Guardians situation where they're just gonna crack jokes. You're not, like in Guardians 2, they're doing that really awesome hero pose, and then Mantis just gets hit in the face by a rock, which absolutely hilarious. Um, but it is a Marvel thing. It is a Marvel thing to undercut maybe like some tension or something cool with a joke. Um, I mean, they even retroactively undercut the pose in um, the first Avengers, not the one on the street, but the one in front of Loki in Endgame. They retroactively undercut it with a joke by having Stark go, "Okay, we can all go posing up a storm later." Like, I think I think it's funny that they're kind of aware they fully know what they're doing and that they've set a formula. But I also think it is necessary for movies like Eternals to buck the trend, to be different, and maybe not necessarily please everyone. Um, and I think the reason for that being necessary for not pleasing everyone is because eventually, in doing stuff differently, you are going to find a different thing that pleases everyone. Um, it's going to take some trial and error, and maybe not all your movies are going to be making $1 billion, though I would argue that every single Marvel movie that came out in 2021, barring No Way Home, which did actually make $1 billion, they would have all made $1 billion in a normal year. Maybe Eternals, maybe not so much. They probably would have just been right on the line, but they would have all crossed $1 billion. And that's great that Marvel's doing so well. They have they have these down to a formula, but I think at a certain point, you got to change the formula. You go from elementary school, you're doing 1+1. You go to middle school. Now you're throwing X in there, and you get to high school. Oh yeah, here's X plus Y equals Z. Figure it out. I think Marvel needs to start graduating from elementary school to middle school. In that terms. However, moving on to No Way Home, that is fan service done extraordinarily well. Because it isn't like, hey everyone, I'm Doc Ock. Hi, you guys remember me from that one time in Spider-Man 2? And like, there are a few lines like that. I do think the double usage of the power of the sun in the palm of my hand felt a little weird. They should have axed one of those. And I thought that Green Goblin's, or I guess Norman Osborn's, I'm something of a scientist myself. Like those lines felt a little out of place, but I understand why they were in there, and it didn't ruin my enjoyment of the movie. But like the big things is Toby and Andrew coming back. It was done well. It wouldn't have been, because like I know in reading up on a lot of Into the Spider-Verse, they wanted to put Toby, Tom, and Andrew all in Into the Spider-Verse, but it wouldn't have been anything of substance. It would have just been a, hey, look, they're there. But in this, they have a reason for being here. They have a reason for existing in this universe, or coming over into this universe. And not only that, but it drives the plot forward. They aren't there just to be there and please the fans. I mean, they are 100%, but they serve a function in the story. And so do all the villains. Like all of them do. I think some to a lesser extent. I feel like Lizard kind of just wasn't really used in the movie at all. He was just kind of there. I feel like you probably could have replaced him with someone else. I don't know who. Actually, honestly, now that I think about it, you probably couldn't have replaced him unless it was someone from Tom's Rogues Gallery, which is not very big right now, but that's not the point. It's fan service done well, and it's fan service that makes sense. Going back to what I was talking about with Rise of Skywalker and Force Awakens, it's functioning fan service, not it's just their fan service. And I think that's the balance that needs to be struck. Obviously, with new movies coming out, like original IPs and whatnot, there's not going to be any fan service because there aren't any fans. But, if there's, stuff coming out like sequels and movies based off pre-established, IPs, there's going to be fans, and you need to appease them to an extent. It's like if you made a Daredevil movie and he just wasn't blind, and it's like, sure, maybe you could make it work within the story of the movie, but if you tell me you're making a Daredevil movie, that dude needs to be blind, because we as fans know that is an fundamentally unchangeable aspect of the character. And I think that's one thing that some Miss Marvel fans are a little bit worried about right now, because it seems like they might be changing up her power set. We'll have to see how that plays out, and maybe they don't really change her power set all that much. But I know that there are certain parts of that character and all comic book characters that just can't really be changed because they are so fundamental to that character and people grow attached to that stuff. It's, it's like taking away Superman's ability to fly. Sure, he can work without it, but he shouldn't have to. So it's one of those things. I think striking a balance in fan service is what you need to do. And even though I think there does need to be a balance, I also do believe that the balance should be slightly tipped in the favor of doing new things. But not doing new things just to do new things. Yeah, I think balance is the way to go, but maybe like put just an extra drop in creativity. As much as I would love 100 million portal scenes in every future Marvel movie, it's gonna get stale eventually if that's all they do. Which, by the way, I just want to point out that two of the biggest pieces of fan service in the last 3 years have come from Doctor Strange portals. Coincidence? Yeah, maybe, but the whole portal scene, and then you got Tom and Andrew coming in through the portal. There's a pattern is forming.
And I think the culmination of that pattern will take place in Multiverse of Madness. I am
100%.
I am convinced we are gonna get the most. Ooh, okay, maybe not. Hang on, let me rephrase this. I think. Ooh. I think what we're gonna see. Man, I'm gonna set the bar really high here. I am hoping, and I'm almost expecting it a little bit, that whatever's coming in Multiverse of Madness is gonna trump Endgame and No Way Home combined. Now that's a lot of pressure, right? But I wouldn't be surprised if they dragged in some pre-existing X-Men characters. I would not be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if they. I don't know if I'd really want this per se, but I wouldn't be surprised if they dragged in previous Fantastic Four characters. I don't know how I feel about that because although the old Fantastic Four movies, I'm talking old. I'm not talking Fanforstic because Fanforstic was so bad, but I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a lot of different crossing of paths in Doctor Strange, especially because you're right. There is a pattern forming. But I think you're right. I think in saying like, I think in saying there needs to be a balance, it is very well spoken. I think the fact that you're absolutely right. Like, you can do a million portal scenes, and those might be great for a little bit, but you're right, it will get stale. And I think what Marvel is doing really well is exploring territories, and sometimes it's well received and sometimes it's not. But the truth is, like, sometimes the fans don't always know what they are asking for. Sometimes the fans are asking for the same thing over and over again, and they just don't realize that gets boring really quickly. And so that's where creative direction in a different way is sometimes actually the better thing to do. And you're right. Like, there does need to be a little bit of fan service in that, because you're right. If they did make a Daredevil movie without Matt Murdock being blind, okay. Like, I get we're trying to explore new territories, but this defeats the purpose of the character. Like, you don't want the creative difference to be like, did you even look at the source material? Like, you want to follow it to a degree. There are very staple parts of a character that you want a part of there, and Marvel has tiptoed the lines of those characters Taskmaster is a great example. Mandarin is a great example. And, they obviously brought it back because they realized they went too far. Ancient One is a great example. They have experimented with, okay, how far can we get with this, or get away with this, and sometimes it's good. Other times it's like you got a Ralph Boner on your hands and you're like, okay, let's not. Can we just?
I'd like to defend that. I think Ralph Boner might be the most hilarious joke in the entire MCU. Up there, I said it.
Okay, and that's fair. That's fair. And you know what? Because because I have a theory that Ralph Boner actually genuinely is Quicksilver. We never figured out who okay, we're gonna get on a tangent for a little bit. We never figured out who the missing person was. Right? Am I right? In WandaVision, we never found out who the missing person was. The missing person, because they kept bringing up, like there's a missing persons case, and I'm tracking that person, and they're in Westview.
I don't remember. I never got around to rewatching WandaVision.
Yeah.
And it's been a year since that started, so I'm fuzzy on more of the minor details, but I thought the missing person was Agatha. Oh wait, no, that was the person that they couldn't identify, or like.
Yeah.
I think it was Agatha. I don't think it was Ralph.
Okay, I'd have to rewatch it because I don't know. Anyways, if they never did find out who the missing person was, whatever, giving him an alias to go by isn't that out of the norm for a missing. I don't know. Anyways, that's just a theory of mine. I don't know how that would connect in the whole multiverse thing. I just think that's way too big of a coincidence for you to just drop in our lap and then be like, oh. But if it is a joke, all right. As a fan, I'm like kind of disappointed, but whatever. Anyways, so I think you're right. I think giving the fans exactly what they want all the time isn't actually the right thing. It's like when you're a kid. When you're a kid, all you want to eat every day is ice cream and candy bars. But the more you do that, and the more that your parents allow you to get exactly what you want, the sicker you get, the more unhealthy you get, the more it just doesn't lead to the results that you're wanting. And sometimes we have to trust the executives. Well, Warner Brothers is a whole nother story. But sometimes you do have to trust the executives to know what they're doing. Kevin Feige, it has done phenomenal. With, especially recently with the whole multiverse story arc. Phenomenal job just making sure that the stories intermeld and yet they're telling different stories. And WandaVision was so experimental. Shang-Chi was so experimental. Eternals was so experimental. Black Widow was so experimental. Exploring new grounds as a fandom is important. And keeping very important parts of that character is also so important. And so I think you're right in saying there does need to be a balance there. So yeah, I think this was a really good topic, and I think it kind of was very eye-opening as far as, what we're looking for and stuff like that. Are there any other remarks you want to say, or anything, any other points you want to bring up? Because I know we didn't talk about everything in this kind of category, but I feel like we covered a pretty good ground. But I'm always up for like more questions or different things to talk about. So,
I mean, just one real quick thing. It doesn't need to be a whole thing, but I think piggybacking off of sometimes having to trust the executives is that sometimes what the fans want is just straight up wrong. I think the biggest example of this is the much requested, especially after Rogue One, an R-rated Star Wars movie. I think that does not need to happen ever in a million years. I don't think there's any reason to justify an R-rated Star Wars movie, and yet fans repeatedly ask for it. And I think that is an example of fans being totally wrong on every level. Because there's no reason for it. And you see this some other times too in Marvel, but the R-rated Star Wars is really what I think of when I think the fans are just wrong on this one, straight up.
Yeah. Especially with Star Wars, because as long as it's existed, its film universe and otherwise, there are it's like how much we've discovered the ocean. Like, sure, it's like a pretty massive thing and it's existed for a long time, but we only know a fraction of the stories. Like, there are so many more stories to tell before we could even consider an R-rated Star Wars film. Like, I don't know, High Republic, Old Republic, the time in between. You got the Obi-Wan series, the Ahsoka series. There is not a lack of story development that you could go with Star Wars. And I feel like that recommendation should only come when there's a lack of freshness to the series, but there isn't at all. It's as long as it's existed, it is still fairly fresh. Like, we don't even have 20 Star Wars movies yet. I don't think, at least. Like, we don't even have 20 full-length films yet. And the MCU is close to 30, I would say, right?
Yeah, I think last time I checked, we're past 25.
Yeah. So, and Marvel even has so many more stories to tell. Now, I feel like Marvel can have a pass at like an R-rated movie. Deadpool, most like, you're okay to do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I am gonna be frank. This whole, like, I know we've had this whole discussion of like, yeah, it should be very balanced. When it comes to Marvel Studios having their hands on Deadpool and Disney having their hands on Deadpool, I am a little concerned because we've never seen an R-rated superhero movie come from the likes of Disney or Marvel Studios, in that matter. So, we'll see how it goes, and I still have faith in Kevin Feige to do the right thing and do a good job, and especially the fact that Ryan Reynolds is coming back. I think that's a very great start. But anyways, I think Marvel Studios gets a pass, but you're right. Like, Star Wars has always been a family saga. Yes, it tells extreme stories and darker stories for sure, but it has always remained in that it's grown up in a household almost like an heirloom with these families, and I think it should probably stay there for the time being. So I agree with you there. But yeah, is there anything else you wanted to talk about? I'm game for whatever.
No, I think we've covered all the bases that I'd like to cover on this discussion.
Sweet. Well, awesome. Okay, that concludes episode 2 of season 1. Andrew, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. It has been an absolute honor, and definitely excited to talk about future projects with you, and it's going to be good. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this.
Oh yeah, no problem. Always love doing this.
For sure.
It's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we'll be seeing you guys. Thank you so much for listening to Pop Culture Roundup, and we will see you soon.